It started with the thunder of long-range guns. As the Horde charged, both sides vented an infinity of city-killing fire. Titans vomited missiles at the wall. Other Titans gunned down the incoming volleys and replied with their own incendiary rages. The wall shook beneath the defenders' feet as its gun emplacements poured firepower into the wasteland. It still shook. The Delphic battlements still fired, even on the second dawn, with the enemy at the defenders' throats, its few remaining guns blasting and their slaved auto-loading mechanisms clanking, making the entire rampart shudder endlessly. How many tens of thousands among the Horde were killed in the first charge to the rampart? How many Titans were torn apart by cannonade? How many gunships and dropships and troop carriers and transports were blasted out of the sky? The scale of it was madness, the numbers untrackable, meaningless. Even with an eidetic recall, Zephon could process almost none of it. It was just the prologue. All just a laughable prologue to the moment the Horde reached the wall. The attackers poured everything into the assault without heed or need of tactics. They came in suicidal packs of frenzied warriors, descending on jump packs. They came in gunships and transports, carving furrows along the battlements and massacring defenders as they crash-landed in deployment. They blackened the sky with dropships and the towering figures of converted Titans. They came from the ground, climbing the Delphic wall with axes and blades, ascending over the mounds of their own dead or the piles of spent shells vomited forth from the battlement's ammunition ports. However they gained the ramparts, the defenders met them in a tide of red ceramite, locked shields and plunging blades. For Zephon, it began when a walking inferno that had once been a warlord Titan reached the wall, towering over him like a blazing effigy. The Titan, dying from its wounds and aflame from crown to clawed feet, was more a thing of flesh than sacred iron, and no longer moved as a Titan moved. Ligaments and veins and muscles worked slickly around its iron skeleton. It gripped the wall with great hands of metal and bone and leaned forward, its flesh-metal jaw opening, disgorging a troop ramp like a bladed tongue, vomiting its cargo of world eaters right onto the rampart. The thing was laughing as it did it, laughing from the speakers in its cheeks and throat, laughing even as it burned to death. Zephon, in the front rank, caught a World Eater's chain axe against the flat of his blade, and from that moment on, existence on the ramparts became an assault of sensation. Sight, sound, smell, all of it became a thing to endure instead of experience. A soldier could lose their mind in this, through sheer exposure to sensation. Thousands of the humans did. Another World Eater gained the wall half a second after he'd killed the first. Zephon beat the pommel of his blade against the warrior's faceplate, once, twice, thrice. Ceramite dented, cracked, sharded. The World Eater roared his god-soaked noise, grabbing for Zephon's throat with one hand, thrusting a dagger in the other. The Blood Angel deflected the whirring blade with the edge of his greave, lanced his blade down in a two-handed grip that sank halfway to the hilt in the warrior's collarbone. He barely managed to drag it free before the World Eater fell, his hearts destroyed. And yet the defenders held to a ragged order. Imperial Army soldiers climbed onto the rear tiers of the rampart to launch grenades and stitch the air with lasgun beams over the heads of the warring Astartes, spearing into the enemy ranks. Where the line was breached, where the Blood Angels were beaten back or massacred in place, custodians led reserve forces to stem the tide. Word of Sanguinius spread across the Vox. Reports that he was on the south wall, repelling a sapper assault, or the west wall, leading a boarding action upon an Imperator Titan, or the north wall, rallying the broken defenders and retaking lost ground, or the east wall, where he was hunting enemy officers, lancing them from above as he swooped in low, soaring again after each confirmed kill. Who knew what was true? On the wall, every warrior was caged within their own war. Zephon only saw Sanguinius once after the battle began, a brief vision of his golden Primarch spiraling through the air high above their heads, hopelessly pursued by a pack of traitors in jump packs. He'd looped around, cutting 3 of them from the sky in as many seconds, then beat his wings to rise higher than the survivors could boost. Ansrael went down, grappled by a cackling Emperor's Children legionary, while humans in scraps of armor stabbed at the joints of his warplate with energized knives. Zephon hacked him free and dragged him back up. Less than a minute later, Anzarael returned the favor, killing a World Eater and pulling the fallen Zephon back to his feet. Sanguinius was gone, back to the realm of Vox reports that already took on the flavor of legend. Zephon fought on, his mind cold even as his flesh was wretched with heat. By now, he would usually be frothing at the mouth within his helmet, exhaustion and bloodthirst combining to bring him to the very edge of his control. Yet he stayed cold and clear, enduring, hurting, fighting. Any battle is a succession of distinct conflicts, and the effect is magnified in sieges. 100 meters down the line, warriors might be waiting in phalanx readiness, still yet to bloody their blades, knowing they must not break ranks and leave their position undefended. 100 meters in the other direction, warriors are fighting for their lives, have been fighting for hours. Then the flow of war shifts. Reserve elements charge in to relieve exhausted defenders. Those that have been fighting for hours on end suddenly find themselves in a brief sphere of calm, able to retreat or brace for the next inevitable assault. Even in the shield-to-shield phalanx warfare of old Earth, men would wear themselves down to enervation within minutes. Those ancient battles that lasted hours were in truth divided into dozens of lesser skirmishes, broken up by entrenchment, advance, retreat, relief, recovery. It had to be this way. The human body was at the mercy of mortal musculature. War in the first stage of trenches and gunpowder weapons was a horrendously long game of brief strikes and charges, broken up by days, months of waiting for the order to advance. The taking of a city still necessitated patrols, rides in armored personnel carriers, returning to one's own lines for resupply, all transpiring over the course of weeks. The fighting was sporadic, not constant. But on the Delphic battlement, even the Astartes suffered. The press of bodies was all-consuming. Zephon saw nothing beyond the frenzy of overwhelming movement on all sides, at all angles. The threat of seizure was a constant in the muscles he had that were still flesh instead of Dark Age steel. The Kron at the edge of his eye lens display counted time in stuttering leaps that went in both directions. Just another thing that had ceased making any sense. Thralls in Legion robes and silver breastplates were everywhere within the defenders' lines. They hunched and crouched and scrambled between their Blood Angels' masters, some hauling away the dead, dragging corpses back out of the way for the sake of their lord's footing, others firing between the shoulders of the fighting legionaries, pouring lasfire into the faces of the War Master's human soldiers. It seemed every atom around him was visible, vibrating in peaceless motion. He heard everything. Everything. Thousands of sounds adding up to an oceanic roar, its elements indivisible. A blade against a blade was a clash. A bolt gun discharging was a rattling boom. But hundreds of thousands, all at once and over, became white noise without surcease. He smelled nothing but the burn reek of charred armor and firing processes, a stink so thick it threatened to replace air. Each breath in tasted of physaline. Each breath out tasted of the countless other chemicals used in the manufacture of annihilation. In the rare moments he saw anything past the warrior directly in front of him, it was always a momentary impression of titans dueling in front of the battlement. They went at one another with saw blades and fists, and hammers and short-range volleys of fire that occluded them in smoke before Zephon could discern which side either one fought for, let alone who might be winning. And so it went. The engines of Legio Ignatum repelled every charge made against the portcullises sealing the Delphic archway. The ground of the wasteland was blended to ruination by the levels of firepower brought to bear, an expanse of hills and ravines through which the War Master's horde poured forward. Princess Shiva Makul of Irakundos did what she could to thin the numbers of infantry and armor, but their orders from the Great Angel were clear. Ignatum was there to kill titans. The portcullis must stand. They fought unsupported by infantry. And that was a dangerous way for Titans to wage war. It left them vulnerable, with several Ignatum god machines already standing motionless, boarded by the warriors of the Horde, their crews locked in fighting within the confines of their Titans-engineered bones. Their principal advantage was the Delphic battlement behind them, and the keep atop it, with its shield-bursting gun batteries. Iracondos had scored its first kill against a charging Reaver, an interfector brawler, stalk striding ahead of its own maniple, either thirsting for glory or at the mercy of an unwise machine spirit. With its void shields extinguished and its proud red and black heraldry bored through by gatling fire, the interfector Reaver was 3/4 dead already. Iracondos hadn't even needed to open fire at range. By the time the brawler was up close, sparks were raining from her abused arm joints, and she gushed oil and fluids from a dozen major wounds. The Ignatum Reaver strode forth to meet her opponent in front of the portcullis, stalking around to the rear where her plating was thinnest, and finishing her spinally with a volley of overcharged laser. But the hunting got harder as the hours rolled on. Shiva saw Gilgamesh crumble when it was half erased from existence by a volley of warp missiles. She saw Optima Dictat lose its brawl against another warlord, gutted by the miserable slowness of her rival's chain fist. Magna Excelsior was brought down by the dogs of Audax, dragged from her feet by a net of Ursus claws, and overrun by exoplanar Xenos, a description among the Mechanicus that was swiftly falling out of favor. Most crews were using Neverborn to describe the things now. A few even named them demons. Iracondos held the line until her death, which came at the hands of the war-bringer Glaive Maiden. Shiva didn't see it coming. Her Titan's demise was just one of the many that came at maximal range from coordinated fields of fire, when maniples would group up for a kill. The shell from Glaive Maiden's Quake Cannon struck 6.61 seconds after the final layer of Iracondos' voids cracked out of existence, destroying the Reaver's head and a significant portion of its left shoulder superstructure. With the god machine deprived of command crew, its stabilizers vented pressure, powered down, and went slack. The Titan's corpse toppled forward into the wasteland, where it settled with a crash and quietly burned, already half buried in a crater carved out by enemy artillery. Not that it would ever enter any Martian or Terran archive, but there was a lone survivor of this final fall. His name was Maestol Vurir, and he was a deacon engine seer of middling rank within the Adeptus Mechanicus, as well as a lifelong servant and ally to the noble Legio Ignatum. He lived for almost another 2 hours, his legs crushed in the wreckage of Iracondos' annihilated insides. There he remained, in excruciating pain, praying to a machine god he'd never failed, beseeching the Omnissiah not to abandon him now. For the final 108 minutes of his life, between prayers of course, Maestol tried in vain to move some of the debris off his legs, while it became harder and harder to breathe. He was unsure if he would expire from organ failure, when his augmented heart and lungs gave out under the strain of maintaining his broken form, or fluid loss from the blood and reagent lubricants he was leaking from his shattered legs. Ultimately, it was neither. A chance spark from the Titan's failing electricals ignited a pool of spreading promethium, and he couldn't crawl away from the fire. It engulfed him, eating him along with the rest of Iracondos' insides. He wasn't limited to a Skitaris' coded bleating, and possessed a voice that was mostly human, so he could still scream, which indeed he did. Arkan Land's new leg was killing him. Not literally, but a person should be forgiven for their moments of hyperbole, provided they were validated by context. And Land, in the middle of a war between demigods, while limping on a bionic leg that was poorly integrated and increasingly refusing to obey him, was feeling extremely validated by context. He'd also learned a lesson he would have preferred to go his entire life without learning. And that was the primal horror that runs through your guts when your own lines break. Land had come to realize that even more frightening than open battle was the moment a deadlock, slipping into a defeat, risked becoming a retreat. When a line holds, you can rely on the souls next to you, fighting as hard as you're fighting, and the soldiers behind you ready to rush in and aid you when needed. Even in the worst of the chaos, there's a near unconscious comfort in these things. When a line breaks, you lose these tattered, precious reassurances. You can no longer rely on the men and women around you, if they're even alive at all. You're confronted with the fact that the enemy is stronger than you. You can lose. You can die. You will die if you hold your position and allow yourself to become surrounded. What do? Stand and die? Retreat and abandon the few survivors around you? Seeing you run, they run themselves, either out of the same prudence or the same cowardice, and the dissolution spreads. It's a train of consequences, each unfolding in inevitable succession as more defenders desert the unraveling line. The War Master's forces broke through again and again, repelled at first by Blood Angel's reserves, then by Custodian-led human units. How the Astartes in the front lines could even see what was happening was a mystery to Land. He focused on shooting between the warring Blood Angels, atomizing World Eaters and Death Guard, and who knew how many human soldiers in the colors of the War Master's regiments. When Zephon and the others stumbled on the mounds of bodies, he joined in with Aristes and the other thralls in dragging the corpses back for flamer teams to incinerate. Transactor 7Y1 had covered him without him needing to ask her. He was determined to take her with him, back to Mars, if they somehow survived. Many of the bodies they dragged turned out to still be alive. That had been quite the unpleasant series of revelations. It surprised him every time they started thrashing. Some were well on their way to dying, others were hideously mutilated in the manner most unfortunate souls tend to become if they were foolish or zealous enough to go into battle against the Legiones Astartes. They groaned and flailed and cried out for help as Land dragged them back from the front lines. Plenty of them still had enough fight left in them to stab at him or try to shoot him. These he dispatched with an atomic slug to the forehead, or he let the thralls' bayonets finish them off. A notable few were still aware enough of their surroundings to take heed of the incineration teams waiting at the battlement's rear, and these struggled or pleaded for mercy. Land dragged them to their burning deaths without even a proton's worth of guilt. Sweat coated him. He was swaddled in the stink of his own body heat, dragging and shooting and, yes, let's be honest, cowering and running for hours on end. Along with the other humans, he was exhausted long before the Astartes even showed the first signs of tiring. When the order rang out for the first reserves to march in, Land had fallen in place, dropping from exhaustion. Spit ran from his bloody lips in stalactite strings. His muscles shivered with an exhaustion too profound to codify. Unmoving, he let the reserves charge around him, and indeed over him, waiting for Transactor 7Y1 to help him up once their replacements had passed. Once he was back on his feet, they made their limping way back towards the rearward bunkers, set up as respite stations. Zephon's thralls were with him, also granted reprieve. The wounded, in their droves, were carried along the Royal Ascension, through the open Eternity Gate and into the Sanctum. Custodians and Sisters of Silence still guided scores of Imperial Army troops out from the Sanctum, ordering them to support sections of the embattled wall. "We've been fighting forever," said Land. His tone was one of exhausted wonder. The thralls nodded, their faces matching those of all the soldiers falling back around them, displaying a kind of grim awe that they were still alive. Transactor 7Y1, her facial expression obviously hidden by her helmet, pointed out that it had not been forever. She gave him the precise elapsing of time instead. "It's close enough, T," Land sighed without rancor. "Close enough to forever." Within the hour, they were back at the front line. Above all of this soared the Lord of the Red Sands. He beat flayed wings as he hurled himself again and again at the Sanctum Imperialis below. Each attempt saw him thrown back into the sky, while the gods' laughter at his failure echoed in his ears. Angron roared the words which would, in centuries to come, define his legion. He bellowed that oath across the sky, with only the scarcest conception of what he was saying. Words repeated in the shouted voices of every living world-eater. Words taken by the ignorant defenders as the ravings of berserks and killers. Blood for the blood god! Skulls for the skull throne!